And I remember last Sunday, after our joys and concerns, the Reverend observed that he'd heard two strands of concern. The two strands woven together make perhaps the most important question of my life, and maybe yours too. How do we live an intentional life, caring for and growing ourselves while staying politically active, politically engaged with the community? Emerson and Thoreau, the spiritual fathers of Unitarianism that we practice every Sunday, were working on the same question. Thoreau said, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and to see if I could learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not yet lived." So, got a question? No answer? Wait patiently. Doing what? Living the question, living the waiting. Then, after a time, living the answer. Thoreau was a writer, a thinker, and a storyteller. He lived his thoughts. His life was his story. We remember him because of his story at Walden. Well, here's my story, and it's got a singing part for you. Of course. I've just turned 77. 6 years ago, I was visiting my new grandson in Portland, Oregon, and walking around, I picked up a book for a quarter at a library sale. The Saturday Review had put out a series of books in which they asked famous people to create essays entitled, "What I Have Learned." I'm a sucker for that. There was Dag Hammarskjöld, head of the UN, remember him? The futurist Buckminster Fuller, Dwight Eisenhower, remember him? And Harry Golden. You probably don't remember. As a new grandpa, I was thinking that my grandson might still be quite young when I pass on to the next project, the next big project. Some of the other gray heads in this room may resonate with this situation. So I decided to write him a book, or at least a chapter of a book, called What I've Learned. It's a book full of stories, songs, paintings, and of course little essays about what I've learned, kind of like a resume, though I'm not sure what I'm applying for. Immortality? Maybe. Coherence? Certainly. In the 80s, I got a job directing an educational nonprofit here in Chicago. In the interview, a board member, a high-rolling tax attorney, referred to me as that fast-talking guy from New York and complained that I had a messy resume. He didn't understand that my resume is my life story, not just my work history. It's full of questions. He wasn't listening for the thread. He said, how can you be a mechanic for Amtrak with a graduate degree in English? I'm going to tell you how. You make the path by walking it. In the 1830s, when the Unitarianism that we know grew up, thinkers like Emerson, Thoreau, and Fuller had to confront poverty, the Mexican War, slavery, and the disappointingly low level of consciousness that excused or supported these crimes against humanity. When I was growing up, and many of you, Americans' dirty laundry flapped in every backyard and on every TV screen. The criminal war in Vietnam, black children murdered in Alabama, you remember. We marched with thousands down Main Street, shouting at faces in the windows and bystanders on the street, "End the war, join us!" But few of those faces did, and I wondered why. The 60s encouraged us to question everything: the state, the economy, education, the rights and obligations of citizenship, and even the ethics of personal relationships. We had lots of good ideas, but what I didn't have was enough direct experience with the problems we had set ourselves to solve. I realized that I've lost my water. Oh yeah. I realized I didn't have enough direct experience. And I decided that I needed to know the worlds that other people lived in. Mostly that meant listening, but also participating. I had questions. It sure looked like to me that capitalism was predatory, cannibalistic, and even suicidal. And I think we can see that even more clearly today. I wanted to talk about these ideas, not shouting them from across the street, but standing shoulder to shoulder with people confronting the problems in their own way. I started innocently enough I was off from school, 15 years old in 1964, and I found myself rambling around Washington, D.C., celebrating the predictably triumphal tale of America with Lincoln and Washington memorials as my props. But just across the river in Virginia, my public school would not celebrate Lincoln's birthday. Instead, we celebrated Lee Jackson Day. Good questions jumped right into my path, and so did good trouble. Because walking by the Health, Education, and Welfare building, I encountered something entirely unexpected. I'm going to sing you that story, and it's got to sing in part for you. I don't really need this, but I feel safer. When I was about 15, I went down to Washington, D.C. to see the shrines of liberty and freedom, freedom, freedom. That's your part. Well, marble's white and grass is green. It is such a quiet scene. Is this just what people mean by freedom, freedom, freedom? Very good. Walking down the avenue, I stopped by H-E-W. Then I saw what people do for freedom, freedom, freedom. Black women stood out on the street, shouting out their right to eat. Well, I moved up so I could see some freedom, freedom, freedom. Through the door I went inside. The leaders of the group were white, and they were asking so polite for freedom, freedom, freedom. And so we asked for Mr. Big to tell him what his bureau did to families and wives and kids, and freedom, freedom, freedom. Well, then up stepped a man in gray. He said, Mr. Big's not here today, but he'll get the message if you go away. From freedom, freedom, freedom. Well, hearing this, we turned to go. Then it came from down below, angry voices shouting, no! Freedom, freedom, freedom. Through the door they came inside, pushing all the men aside. Black women made the sea divide. Freedom, freedom, freedom. Now it was an angry crowd. I was scared, but I was proud when we brought the big man down for freedom, freedom, freedom. Well, grass is green and marble's white. Freedom's call is not polite. But what is there to do but fight for freedom, freedom, freedom? Good singer. Get you ready for the next one. At the same time, America was exploding with writing, music, art, theater that gave voice to our questions. James Baldwin, Lena Horne, the Beatles, Jefferson Airplane, Pete Seeger, and of course, Bob Dylan. Like this story and that song we just did, we were building a culture of resistance, community, and questioning. We were challenging ideas and power. We were making the path by walking it. Remember when Dylan sang, "Something is happening, and you don't know what it is. Do you, Mr. Jones?" So we didn't know where we were going exactly. We were making the path by walking it. After college, I wanted to create bridges to people with very different life experience than mine. America was gripped by the farm crisis. With family farms failing every day, I hitchhiked west to save the family farm. I listened and I talked and I learned. I worked the wheat fields, I bucked hay, I chased cattle around. I am a terrible cowboy. Then I moved to the city. I joined the Sandblasters Union, doing the dirtiest and most dangerous job in Seattle shipyards. Then, coming to Chicago, I led a foundry strike, and I built Ford Thunderbirds and repaired Amtrak's locomotives. And I learned that the safety of both workers and consumers and the planet is sacrificed daily to the gods of profit and production. Therefore, the painting. Here's a song from the 30s, you probably know the tune. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the building of the ford. It is built under conditions that offend even the Lord. Amid a mighty hurry and amid a mad uproar, production marches on. I used to sing that to myself on the assembly line. I taught English to immigrants and learned how similar we all are, even when we speak different languages. I taught at Stateville Penitentiary and learned how different we are, even when we think we are speaking the same language. I taught drug addicts and learned about my own addictions. And I learned that I taught history through song in Chicago public schools and learned that principals want their elementary schools quiet. I learned that all our problems are systemic and the struggles interconnected. Listening, talking, listening some more, talking some more, demonstrating and writing it down. As Mary Oliver says, observe, reflect, now write about it. The next step in my messy resume was to bring those door-opening conversations to a larger scale. Directing a nonprofit, I helped 17,000 Chicago school children in a year to learn how to do history in a way that addressed their three most basic questions. Who am I? How do I fit? How did my world get to be this way? It's not about names and dates and places, is it? After 15 years, I thought I needed to do some history myself. So moving to the river in southern Ohio, I helped write a book on the early Underground Railroad. My house on the river was at the exact spot that Harriet Beecher Stowe describes in Uncle Tom's Cabin, where babe in arms, runaway slave Eliza, jumps from floating ice to get from Kentucky to Ohio. If you haven't read that book, read it. It's a great book. I wondered, that experience made me wonder, what are the turning points in people's lives when, even at great risk, they step out of the familiar and into a new world? So I'm going to do you a song about Eliza, just part of a song. And once again, I have lost my guitar pick. Oh no, there it is. So many things to keep track of. Well, mistress, she's so worried. At night she locks us in. She tucks away her conscience and she talks to me of sin. She says I am her property that I cannot steal. She said the folks up north won't help me. Well, I pray to God they will. I'll take the creek down to the river, cross the river to the house on the hill. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. God knows I'll run, I will. So now I'm waiting, I'm just waiting, like a catfish in a pan. I try to keep my head down and do the best I can. But if you take away my future, God knows I ain't no liar. I'll jump out of that pan, right into that fire. I'll take the creek down to the river, cross the river to the house on the hill. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. God knows I'll run, I will. Thank you. So some people embrace struggle to free themselves, and some people embrace it to free others. So from the same show that song came from, there was another character, the son of the foremost abolitionist in the country at that time, Reverend John Rankin. So at 15, Adam Lowry Rankin, his son, had been secretly leading runaway slaves north for years, telling his abolitionist father that he wanted to grow up into another occupation, maybe shipbuilder. He walked down to where the big stern wheeler Uncle Sam was tied up. Chained to the railing was a coffle of slaves headed for New Orleans, including one light-skinned girl about the same age as Adam's sister. She sobbed bitterly, and so did Adam Lowry, as the slave master pulled down her dress to show her wares to a buyer. In that moment, the young man swore he would fight that system for the rest of his life. The next entry on my messy resume was 130 miles north. In a small Rust Belt deindustrialized city, Newark, Ohio, where we built a community organization called the Newark Think Tank on Poverty. For years, Newark had been an industrial powerhouse until the factories moved to Mexico and Southeast Asia. Westinghouse Vice President Harold Schaefer issued this press release as he closed one of the factories that had employed thousands for years and years. This is from the Westinghouse VP. "We regret the personal disruptions that occur and the voids created in the communities that we are leaving. But we also know that this reorganization is an imperative measure we have to take to ensure the future growth and financial health of our major appliance operation." So I worked for 15 years in that community of disruptions and voids to empower the poor. I discovered how far my experience was from that of the poor, homeless, addicted, unemployed, ex-felons of this community that had gone from powerhouse to prostrate desolation in less than a generation. Often, in order to learn something, you have to discover how little you really know. And I discovered I really didn't know very much. Soon after I arrived, I was driving down the street with two of our people, Tanya and Billy, and we stopped at a light. A woman and her children in front of us pushed a wheeled garbage can, like the ones we all use, across the street. Absently joking, I said, "Look at that, taking her garbage for a walk." The woman beside me gently explained that she was moving her family from one rat-infested apartment to another. The garbage can was her suitcase, containing all of her worldly belongings. Observe, reflect, write about it. It was tough going. Real estate developers ran the city government. They planned a middle-class commuter town, but without the poor. Downtown and neighborhood revitalization promised sidewalks, streetlights, parks, jobs, and more. I asked him if the current neighborhood residents would be enjoying those improvements, and the developer replied, "Don't expect me to challenge market forces, Alan." Complexities like gentrification, development, the economics of market forces were firmly disallowed in discussions of policy in this get-her-done Ohio culture. In this culture, there were two easy steps to solve complexities like addiction, homelessness, and poverty. Just say yes to Jesus and no to everyone else. 52 out of 53 Christian churches in that town just said no to opening their doors to the unhoused during a deep freeze. Our state representative told us, "Be patient. A rising tide raises all boats." But the rising tide of resignation threatened to drown us all. I saw what was gripping the town, in fact, many towns in Ohio, all across America. It was an all-encompassing culture that was Christian, punishing, anti-thought, anti-education, unwilling to embrace complexity, and desperately frightened to lose what scraps of privilege they had. Here's a story. One day, I was at the grocery store. I was buying soda for that afternoon's meeting of the poor. An elderly woman, dressed for church, turned to me and nearly shouted in her anger, "I am never shopping here again." I asked her what was wrong. She said, "Did you see that cake?" Yes, I had noticed it out of the corner of my eye. It was a cake decorated for Gay Pride Day. I said, "Ma'am, those people mean you no harm and in fact haven't done you any." She shouted again, "Yes, but they are violating God's law." And I realized she was not afraid of gay people. She was afraid of her own God. I began to reread Emerson and Thoreau, who struggled with their neighbors about this kind of denial. Nonconformist Unitarians, calling themselves transcendentalists, they sensed that the Jesus story in the hands of the organized church had long ago ceased to lead people and the world to better, happier lives. What we encountered in Ohio was not stupidity, but stupefaction. So like Thoreau, I stepped out, as the Buddhists say, back to Chicago, so I could step back in another way. When Thoreau ended his 2-year experiment at Walden, he explained, "I have many more lives to live, and I don't want to spend any more time in that one." He had learned what he needed to learn, and I too have other lives to live, new ways to struggle for a better world. So here I am in Chicago, living perhaps my last life, a life of the mind, trying to understand the intellectual and spiritual starvation of a nation with no appetite for complexity, binging on the frozen food diet that Trump and his corporate class serves to America. I listen and talk to my neighbors, I demonstrate, I read, I write, I go to book discussions at church, I paint, play music, and try to help my community answer the students' questions. Who am I? How do I fit? How did my world get to be this way? There's always been a sweet honeycomb of liberation culture, ideas, songs, stories, art, organizing that sustains people on this journey, that says no to shoulder shrugging, that says change is needed, change is possible. We can do it together. In the 70s, Sweet Honey and the Rock sang it this way. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it's won. Oh, we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it's won. Oh, we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it's won. Oh, and then they go on to say, we who believe in justice just can't sit back and play dumb. We who believe in people, we say yes! It can be done. In many ways, this honeycomb of resistance culture has fallen into disuse. But walking the path of resisting oppression and the dream of creating something better will always find its way to our open eyes, open ears, and open mouths, making theater, dance, songs, stories, worship, and play that calls on us to dream together, to share our experience, and to create what Martin Luther King called the beloved community. We need to rediscover, build, celebrate that culture. I'd like to do it with you. Say your story and save me a singing part. I have closing words. Oh my goodness, I blew it. And now I have to find them.